VC portfolio management and investment thesis design.
Good morning, everyone. Really exciting to be here with such a prestigious group of colleagues and VCs from all over the world. We are going to talk about Thesis as well as portfolio management. I'll take the lead and talk a little bit about how each of these investors think about their investment thesis. And Ken will join me as a co-moderator and start talking about maybe some exciting companies that our VCs have invested in, and maybe some thoughts about the industry in general. We want this panel to be helpful to the audience, especially to CEOs, and so expect a very diverse and engaging discussion. So maybe we'll start with introductions. So I'm Julien Pham, based out of Boston. I'm the founder and managing partner of Third Culture Capital. We are a seed stage firm that invests at the intersection of culture and care delivery. So care delivery means solutions that improve outcomes for patients, reduce the cost of care, and improve the experience of care for both patients and providers. And in terms of culture, for us, it's really identifying these founders who have a diversity of thoughts, diversity of identities, and diversity of lived experiences that make them uniquely qualified and it will be incredible founders. So I'll move to Linus, if you want to introduce yourself and your firm a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Julien. Appreciate it. So I'm Linus Rieder, principal at 415 Capital. We're a very focused MedTech VC, so we focus on cardio-neurovascular solely. We come from a commercial distribution background, which spans over the past 35 years. That's how we started, and our partners started, basically, and then had opportunities to invest parallel to also distributing some of those novel technologies. And based on that track record, we now institutionalized our first, and now also a week ago, our second fund where we had our first close, which we're very happy about. I mean, it's not the easiest time at the moment, as you all know probably. And yeah, we consider ourselves an early stage investor, so preclinical, early clinical stage, that's sort of our sweet spot. And because we're so focused, we have to invest globally. Yeah.
Good morning. I'm Josep Sanfeliu. I'm the managing partner of Asabys. I've been in venture capital for 15 years when I founded before another firm which was mostly focused on biotech, and that has to do with what we do at Asabys Partners, which is the VC based in Barcelona. We have 300 million euros under management. Our last fund is 2022, so we are up for new investments. We invest throughout Europe, US, with a focus in Europe, and obviously a focus in Spain and Barcelona in particular, where there's a lot of medtech and healthcare hub. Our thesis is always very clinically driven. We all come from the healthcare space, mostly pharma biotech, so clinical validation is critical. 50% of what we do is biotech. 50% of what we do also is health tech, and that's where we're here at the MedTech World. Thanks for the invitation to participate in this panel. Today we have 16 companies in different portfolio. We will elaborate that in a minute. And the team is formed by scientists, engineers, and we've been in the industry now for a long time. Hope to contribute to this panel today. Thanks.
I'm Kwame Ulmer. I'm a venture partner at Wavemaker 360 Health. We're a Los Angeles, California-based fund that's been investing for the past 5 years. About 40% of our portfolio includes companies that can be defined as digital health, traditional medical devices, or diagnostics. We have over 200 LPs. Some of them are from large organizations like Amgen and City of Hope, but most of our LPs are healthcare executives that help us source companies, diligence them, and participate in supporting them. Our thesis for Fund 1 and Fund 2, we have 84 million AUM, was around value-based care, and as we raise for Fund 3, we're focused on personalized healthcare, and I'll talk more about that in our conversation.
Hi, I'm Darshana Zaveri. I'm a co-founder and managing partner of Catalyst Health Ventures. We invest in early stage medical devices, some diagnostics, but mostly focused on medtech. We've been investing for about 15 years now investing out of our third fund, where we just had a couple of closes and targeting a final close in Q1. We lead or co-lead investments. We mostly invest in the US and like to invest in companies that we think can become standard of care in the clinical indication that they're prescribed for.
Good morning, Greg Madden from SV Health Investors. SV Health Investors is a 30-year-old healthcare venture capital and growth equity firm. We have offices in Boston and in London. We have almost $3 billion of capital under management. We, from a thesis perspective, we break up that capital under management across 5 different groups within the SV team. Three of those are focused on biotech. And then we have a healthcare growth fund that does both minority growth as well as buyouts in medical devices. And then we have a fund called the MedTech Convergence Fund that does exclusively early stage medical device and digital health investing. I'm involved in both the healthcare growth fund and the MedTech Convergence Fund, overseeing MedTech investments. So what I really like about what our firm's able to do is we're able to invest from seed stage all the way through buyouts across the full continuum of medical device. And so we get nice exposure to opportunities across that breadth of stage. We tend to invest mostly in the United States, but we've made medical device investments in Canada and Europe as well. And it helps to have the leverage of the London office to be able to invest here in Europe.
So I'm Ken Nelson, currently partner in MedTech Advantage Fund. MedTech Advantage Fund is investing exclusively in MedTech Innovator alumni companies. MedTech Innovator is the largest MedTech digital health diagnostic startup accelerator globally. Background-wise, I was a startup commercialization guy. I started my MedTech career with Guidant and Boston Scientific in the implantable pacemaker defibrillator side of things. First 10 years or so of my career, and then the last dozen or so years commercialized the disruptive patch products, first for iRhythm, which eventually went public, then for a company called CardioNet, which became BioTelemetry, which eventually got acquired by Philips. And then lastly, a company called Barty Diagnostics, which got acquired by Hillrom. And then a few weeks later, a combined company got acquired by Baxter. And that company, Greg was actually an investor. They led Series A and kind of invested all the way through. And so now, as an angel investor and a venture capitalist, kind of have the perspective of both an entrepreneur and an investor and a venture capitalist, kind of all in one. So this will be a fun discussion.
Let me ask this first question. Having been an entrepreneur myself, I'm sure the CEOs in this room get really frustrated every time you get a no from a VC and they tell you it's too early or it's too late. What does that really mean? And I'd love particularly to hear from you, Greg, given your experience and now that you have these early stage funds, but also from Kwame, who comes from a very different perspective with the FDA and how he thinks about early versus late and how that is defined within your thesis.
Yeah, so from our perspective, when I hear other firms saying, oh, this opportunity is too early, too late, that's an easy way to say it's just not a fit for us right now. You may or may not be too early or too late for what they do. Just at that moment in time, it's not a fit for their portfolio, and we'll get deeper into how portfolio construction affects investor behaviors at different times in their fund cycle. But what I would say about stage is that it is very difficult, or has been very difficult over the last couple decades, to be an early stage medical device investor. There's been successes, but they've usually taken a very long period of time. And so some of the returns rates of capital that our institutional investors look for, MedTech hasn't always delivered when you invest at the very earliest stages. So I can tell you from my firm's perspective, when I joined it over 20 years ago, we did almost exclusively early stage medical device investing. About 10 years ago, we decided we were only going to do exclusively later stage investing, given the time holds that we were experiencing, and the biotech market was exploding at that moment, and it was hard to compete as a device entrepreneur when biotech companies were going public with 2 patients of data. Fortunately, as time has worn on, we've seen opportunity to invest both early and late, and I think after doing this for a few decades, we tend to see the characteristics of companies that can exit early, and we see companies that we think are really good companies, but may take getting to a commercial stage to be able to exit. And so in those categories, we'll wait. And then if you're kind of in between, as I said earlier, what I really like about what we're doing is we have the ability to have a few different vehicles that can come in early with really patient institutional investors. To the extent that that company doesn't exit, we can cross those investments into our later stage funds and take a company all the way either through a public market path or commercialization, and then on private dollars, and then an acquisition thereafter. So what we've learned as an investing group is to find investors that fit the profile of the opportunity we see. And I think it's really incumbent upon CEOs in this room to find investors whose investors either have the patience required for early stage investing, or if you're a more advanced company, I think there's more opportunity to go to a broader range of venture capitalists that have institutional investors that are generally expecting returns in a 5-year time window. And that's usually possible if you're investing in a commercial stage. It's not always possible if you're investing in a breakthrough therapy at the earliest stages.
Anyone who wants to jump in,
So I'm just going to go off script a little bit, just as I'm thinking about portfolio management and thinking about just, our prior relationship. When do you get to a point where, as a board member and as an investor, you decide to make a significant change in the management of a company? So, for example, when you guys recruited me to come into Barty, you'd already put money in, you'd led Series A, and it wasn't working out commercially, so you brought somebody else in, myself, to try to fix it. But is it difficult to get there because you just invested all this money? And how do you come to that decision that, hey, you know what, we may have made a mistake on the people, but we still like the company, let's find somebody else to turn it around?
Yeah, I mean, I think we try not to get the people wrong, because if you get the people wrong, the whole thing's going in the wrong direction. We've seen great teams do tremendous things with mediocre technology, and we've seen mediocre teams just completely blow an opportunity with an outstanding technology. So you got to get the team right. And in that particular instance, I think it was as much about the team and augmenting it as it was that we had a change in business model. So we thought we were a traditional medical device we were going to sell to hospitals and physicians, and it turned out in order to really penetrate the market, we needed a turnkey solution for hospitals, and so we needed to become a Medicare biller. It became more of a device-enabled service company. And in that vein, we needed people that knew how to sell that business. And so that was a pivot a year in. I think we wasted a year, unfortunately. And so that affected our long-term returns. But I think we were humble enough to realize within a year that the path we were on that was outlined by the founder of the company wasn't going to be the one that would make it successful, and we needed to think bigger and invest more heavily, and brought in the Series B and brought in Ken drive a different commercialization strategy, which ended up being quite successful. And I think where MedTech is heading, I think we're seeing more of that more often, that the traditional models may not be sufficient for converting the market quick enough. And so being able to bring resources to companies that have both healthcare services experience, even drug device combinations, having a 360 view of healthcare really helps, even when you're investing purely in MedTech. But things like digital health are blurring the lines, and it's very helpful to be able to speak to my therapeutics, services, or digital health partners when we're thinking about how to advance a company like Abarty Diagnostics that was doing a mix of digital health device as well as providing an ECG reading service.
On the topic on the late, what's early, I think, at least from a European perspective, I think it makes sense to realize that the change in regulation through the medical device regulation, replacing the directive some years ago, created a huge change in the perspective of the investment community, and that's the reason why many European investors who were doing MedTech stopped doing MedTech investment. So you had to find a way in which you can understand what's late and what's early, because now everything is early from my perspective. Because I used to invest, I invested in companies like Endosense, acquired by Abbott in 2010. That was the investment time, and we divested in 2013. I've done deals, Stat Diagnostica, acquired by Qiagen. This is a Barcelona-based company in diagnostics. These were late stage at the time, because there was the directive. Getting a CE mark was not so hard. Now it's complex. But the way to understand what's late and is early, and this is why Asabys Partners remains committed investing in MedTech and digital health, but mostly MedTech. We are looking at the deals not so much on the early side or the late stage side, is how exciting, obviously, is the scientific, technical, and clinical case, and how economically relevant it is for the community and for the end user, and the patients especially. And to the healthcare systems, which, as you know, in Europe, we have to scale it basically through the public financing of this solution for patients. But more importantly, what are the corporates saying about it? That is a way in which the perception of time, early or late, might be distorted in favor of your investment thesis, because in our portfolio companies, in Medicines, we have in Tel Aviv, we have Baxter and Medtronic from very early. In Madrid, we have Boston Scientific and Medlumics, one of our portfolio companies, from very early. Inbrain, whose Carola Aguilar is around here presenting these days. We have Merck, the pharmaceutical neuro franchise division, also invested very early. So a way to manipulate what's early and late. Obviously, we all in the audience know what early investment is, and Series A's and seed and Series B, blah, blah, blah. But the time is relative, or the perception of early or late is relative if you have the right partners and the corporates coming in precisely now, where there's a situation in which there's a lack of financing. And also some medtech companies, the corporates are not so eager to get early, right? But there's still a good chance of interactions with the industry that allows us at Asabys to be, in summary to your question, skeptical about what is early and late. So invite the audience and entrepreneurs to join us, even if it seems early, because there might be ways for us to look at it seriously. Thanks.
I'd love to hear from you, Linus, on your perspective, because you mentioned that you do seed and very early. And then that would be a great jumping point to hear from you, Kwame, because from your perspective, having been at the FDA, it'd be interesting to see what does it take for a company to pass muster through the regulation. And I think that would be a great transition to a question I really want to ask about your thesis about standard of care. So maybe Linus, you start first, and we'll go in that sequence.
Yeah, I think, Joseph, to your point, finding the right partners, as an early stage investor becomes more and more important for us. Seeing that acquisitions take place at a later stage, we need to really think about the co-investors that we take up, and not only support in operational, but also support them financially throughout the lifetime. And it just takes a little bit longer at the moment, but we're confident that that's going to change because strategics have to fill their pipelines again. And at some point, you know, it can't go on like this because you have to support that VC network and that early stage network that is building that pipeline for the strategics. So I think that was a good point. And to the point of the portfolio management, we ourselves have to also change a little bit the way how we have thought about follow-up rounds and continue keeping capital to continue supporting these companies. So it's been a little bit of a change of sort of approach for us as well.
So I think what stands out to me is the experience we had with a company based in Southern California that makes a 3D printed precision spinal device implant. When we first met them, they weren't close to 510K, but approximately a year later, we kept in touch, and the CEO says, Kwame, we're about to submit our 510K. We're working with a consulting firm called Micra, which built their business on regulations for spinal devices. And by the way, we have breakthrough designation. And what that meant at the time was guaranteed coverage of their product. And they had an additional payment. So they had de-risked, from my perspective, 510K, because I knew who they were working with, because I worked with the guy at the FDA who built that business, and reimbursement. So the stars all aligned. So that was on time. And I think when you can have and they had a Series A investor that would not tranche their investment without 510K clearance. And this was all pre-pandemic. Fast forward to now, in lieu of reimbursement, because reimbursement is still very tenuous, and automatic payment for breakthrough designation, what we look for is some involvement with a strategic. We're negotiating terms with a company right now where we are mandating co-investment by a strategic to try and de-risk things.
Darshana, you want to?
Sure. So maybe I'll take a crack at answering a couple of your questions, because I think everything feeds into what is our investment thesis and what attracts us, right? So I think where you were going with your question, Julien, is we are looking for products and companies that will become the standard of care, right? That's a really important component of our thesis, which is why we're not afraid of PMA. In fact, the majority of our companies are approaching, are going through a PMA pathway. The other element of what we look for is companies that have a high chance of exit prior to having to commercialize. And those are products that are of high strategic value, that are in the strategics, sort of shopping list, if you will, that address very large markets, again, have the potential to become the standard of care. How do they become the standard of care? Large unmet needs, easy procedures, not too complicated, cost-effective devices. And those are really, really hard to find. So it's not an easy thing. And I know a few people mentioned how early stage medtech is hard. It is hard. It's very, very hard. And then the other component, I think, of what you asked is what is early stage and what is late stage, and how we define it is, we like to invest in mechanical solutions, what we call mechanical solutions for mechanical problems. And so, as an example, we have a company it's an LAA closure device. Very mechanical. You're closing a hole in the heart with a mechanical device. If you can close a hole in a dog's heart, you can do it in a human heart. And so, the translation between preclinical and clinical is very, very high. We're okay doing those types of companies prior to human data. However, if you're looking at something like neuromodulation or an indirect effect, we'd like to see human data before we invest, and that then becomes early for us. And so I think my advice to you guys is, ask the question, what is early? Every investor will have a different definition of what's early to them. And a lot of it is already on the website, but also ask and sort of get a sense of the thesis.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, I'm sure there's a lot of startups out there that have the same question. When you think about evaluating different startups and when you're going to make that investment, one of the challenges right now, being on the board of a handful of these startups, is trying to get funded in a clinical trial phase. So I'd love to get your perspectives on, do you all do that? Do you all fund clinical studies? And then if you don't, what's the advice that you give to the startups in the room as to which types of investors to approach to get their clinical studies funded? Because that's a tough spot to be in, especially right now in this environment, is getting the clinical studies, those pivotal studies funded. So any advice you could give to the startups in the room would be great.
Well, at least for us, we like to see some level of proof of concept. That could be in humans, it could be in animals, in an area where it directly translates like Darshana was just mentioning. It could be a physiologic mechanism or trigger that the literature, is found in the literature, and you're just going to try and reproduce it. So we will make those bets, but I think the biggest part for us is similar to what Darshana covered, is that we're not interested in payers, because payers and ultimately strategics aren't interested anymore in incremental innovation. We're looking for transformative innovation that can be either transformative in the way we treat a disease or how we reduce the cost of treatment of a disease. And so that's where we're highly focused. I'd say the things that have changed for us over the last 20 years is we are much more willing to do non-invasive or less invasive therapies with the advent of digital health. We've been stepping into those areas. We are not going as heavily into more mature categories like orthopedics, like heart valves, things that where the opportunity to create transformational improvements in the cost or quality of care is frankly just harder. So that's how we've been looking at the market most recently, and so I think when you're if you're an entrepreneur in the audience and you're thinking about what investors should I approach? One is matching the stage of your company to the stage which they invest. This is listed on the website. Looking at their portfolio of investments, is there a parallel in the portfolio? I think that's a good thing. Is there something that could, that is a direct competitor? That's not a good thing. They're unlikely to double down in an area, and frankly, you'd be worried about potential conflicts of interest. So educating yourself on the customer is always a good idea, and you should think of the venture capital partners you're approaching as your prospective client and trying to figure out what problems are they trying to solve, and does your solution fit with their investment mandate.
I would like to add that sometimes when you think about the funding of clinical activities in a company, it's again a matter of understanding that the real inflection point for the investment to be a good investment is basically when the liquidation event happens later on. And since also the frame of the milestones you need to reach have also moved towards commercialization, more than ever, and in Europe especially, you have to build a company with the right investors. I mean, if I go back when I was doing this 2012 or 2011 or 2013, the average Series A MedTech funding in Europe would be like a couple of investors. Now it's 6 investors, the same type of fundraise process in the Series A, because obviously we all know how tough can be the clinical activities, especially with regulation in Europe in a different context, and obviously with the challenges, especially in PMA, and we all precisely target those incremental innovations that require high levels of scrutiny from a regulation standpoint. But no, we have to think that that is not the end of the story. The commercialization needs to happen, traction, partners will want to see sales in the place. So it's a long journey, and sometimes it's also complex because, how do you match so many parties investing in this long-term investment? Like in biotech happened since the very beginning, and think about the clinical strategy and the financing together with the commercial strategy and the financing of those long-term investments. It requires a lot of collaboration from the syndicates and the investor community and the corporates, as you were mentioning before. So, but of course, we do invest. Clinical is like at the core, but it's just before we start the commercialization stage, which is becoming also a relevant moment. And there's not so many investors for those clinical and commercialization stages. We're struggling with some of our companies. Medicines, for instance, got approved 3 months ago, FDA, got CE mark in Europe already for a artificial intelligence algorithm years ago developed in Tel Aviv, and now with operations in Europe, distributed by Medtronic in Europe and now approved in the US, and now we are launching a financing round. So the entrepreneurs and the CEO is having a hard time to knock on the doors of the right investors for the commercialization of an approved product validated in Europe in the US, and it's challenging. There are not so many doors. But we have to think long term and go with the biggest, and then valuation also plays a role, because if you bring in so many people to the table and valuation is too high, what's the equity story behind it? It's a complex algorithm going forward.
Yeah, it's great insight. I did want to pause for a second. We've got maybe 4 minutes left. I think we should probably open it up to a couple questions, because we could sit up here and talk about really interesting stuff, but what's most important is what's most important to you in the audience. But I would like for people to just look around this room for a second. This is the most ridiculous venue for a MedTech conference, and just want to thank Giovanni and Dylan and their teams for doing this. I mean, I feel like we're about to see the Knights of the Round Table come out here in a second. So this is really incredible, and thanks for putting this together, guys. But would like to open it up for a couple questions. Anybody have any questions for this group? Because we've got a great group of panelists up here.
Thanks, all. Just a quick question, and I think it would be helpful for the audience. As you think about portfolio construction and getting in quote unquote early or late, how do you think about capital allocation and how much you invest kind of on the first check-in versus how much you reserve for future rounds of funding as an investor?
Happy to take a crack at that. So we, in MedTech, as Greg said, really hard to do early stage MedTech. We've been doing this for a long time. The lesson we've learned is we invest in early rounds, but we reserve through to exit. And we have to do that because we don't want predatory behavior in later stages, which tends to happen all the time, and because there's just so little capital that goes into MedTech and such few players. So from our perspective, we're doing roughly a third of our total allocation in the first round, and then we reserve and allocate for follow-on rounds. And that also goes to your question, Ken, which is around clinical trials. PMA clinical trials are expensive, and we know we need a lot more money, so we try to keep companies really capital efficient at the early stages where that real value is demonstrated in early feasibility studies, and then bring on other investors, build a syndicate for later rounds.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is we look at it very similarly. It's been very consistent for 20 years that's I think the appropriate ratio. I think as you're sitting in the audience, what you need to think about is the fund you're talking to, and if they're investing out of a $600 million fund versus a $200 million fund, the ratio stays the same, but the dollars get bigger. Bigger dollars is sometimes good, and sometimes it's unnecessary dilution. But if you're talking to a larger fund, they just need to deploy, in some cases, 10 or 15 or more $1 million up front. which may not be in your best interest as a founder. However, it's a real trade-off. Going back to the market to continuously raise capital for small incremental step-ups is probably not an efficient use of time and focus. So you really got to think about what money do I need to get to a meaningful value inflection point, a meaningful milestone that demonstrably increases the value of my business as the amount of capital you want to get to then go back to market. And I think ideally, usually that's kind of a 2 to 3 years worth of capital type of investment. Sometimes it can be shorter, but I think that allows you to weather a lot of storms.
Do you want to take one more question? What do you think? One more?
Hey, hello. I have a question to those of you who invest in medical devices. What do you guys think about the focus that founders should have? The reason why I'm asking this question is that I'm developing a device that can potentially monitor multiple metabolics, but of course we need to start somewhere, and we started from monitoring the glucose level. But is that a good selling point in your opinion? Should we rather take an approach to monitor only one and market that as a key feature and be super laser focused, or you prefer a wider approach, more like an end-to-end product that can potentially diagnose multiple diseases, monitor multiple metabolics, and provide you with a number of other applications?
I have to admit that if there's some hearing loss company in the room, I couldn't hear very well. It was me or? Okay, I think you got the question was more about platform or focused. Is that the idea?
How is your approach to the founders and the company's focus to developing a medical device? Because my medical device can potentially have multiple applications. It can monitor one metabolic, it can monitor 1,000 metabolics. But in terms of fundraising, how do you guys look at the company that can be laser focused on monitoring one metabolic versus a company that can monitor 1,000 metabolics, and on top of that provide the customers with a number of supporting features and applications? Like, what's your standpoint on that?
Yeah, thank you. I think I could understand better. Probably the speakers are facing there, but not here. So anyway, hopefully I can respond, at least on my view. We actually like platform horizontal approaches with potential. And in medical device, that's pretty unique in most of the cases. In interventional cardiology, in many areas, you are focusing on one application, and that's what regulatory-wise you want to be focused on, and you're going to stay there. And obviously, you are putting all the risk into one application, but it's already a challenge and already. But we do like to see this technology, and I think that the revolution that's coming up in materials, in technology associated to data and diagnostics processing. Thank you. Thanks. I think that will probably amplify the opportunities to invest in technologies that might have a single approach, which can be the low-hanging fruit where you demonstrate and validate what you're developing, but obviously the value lies on the potential coming up later. And probably the challenge here is to decide what to pick up, which indication to pick up first, to demonstrate the value of what you're doing, and how to manage the pipeline and what is next, and how the critical path designed to show to your investors and to the regulators that you're in the right track. So we like this multiple application, but the trick is how to prioritize.
Yeah, our recommendation would be take them sequentially, figure out what the best application is to hit first. Maybe it's a lower bar, maybe it's the biggest market. That depends on various circumstances. So I would take them sequentially. The other thing I would think about, which some founders think about, is breaking them up into separate businesses. And I would resist that to the extent that the same buyer might be interested in multiple components. They really despise the division of IP, unless the other application or applications have very different buyers or categories. I think they become less worried about that. So anyways, just something to think about.
All right, great discussion. Appreciate it, all the panelists. Thank you.